A man can spend his whole life building an empire, only to realize too late that the one thing he truly needed was the family he abandoned in silence. Rain washed over Manhattan like liquid silver the night Serena Vaughn stood beneath the crystal chandeliers of the Lancaster Grand Hotel, wearing a crimson silk gown that shimmered softly beneath the golden lights. The exact shade Damien Lancaster once told her reminded him of courage wrapped in elegance. The ballroom glowed with old money and polished perfection, senators and CEOs drifting beneath towering floral arrangements, while a string quartet played near the marble staircase. But Serena barely noticed any of it, because inside her small velvet purse rested the ultrasound photograph she had spent the entire evening touching with trembling fingers. 8 weeks pregnant. After 4 years of marriage and 2 heartbreaking miscarriages, she was finally carrying the child they had almost stopped praying for. Her free hand rested gently against her stomach as she searched the crowd for Damien, imagining the rare softness that would appear in his steel-gray eyes once she told him he was going to be a father. Outside the floor-to-ceiling windows, the city glittered beneath the storm clouds while flashes of camera lights exploded near the hotel entrance downstairs. Serena smiled to herself, thinking Damien was probably delayed by reporters again. The Lancaster name had become untouchable in New York finance, and Damien carried success like a second skin, cold and expensive and impossible to ignore. Yet to Serena, he had once been simply the man who stayed up late listening to her play piano in their tiny Brooklyn apartment before the billions arrived. The man who kissed her fingertips after every performance and whispered that her music made the world quieter. Her heart softened at the memory just as murmurs suddenly rippled across the ballroom like cracks spreading through glass. Serena turned slowly toward the grand staircase, and the warmth drained from her body. Damien stood at the top step in a perfectly tailored black tuxedo, his expression carved from stone, while beside him stood Claire Beaumont in a white satin gown that caught every camera flash in the room. Reporters crowded near the entrance below, their voices rising over one another. "Mr. Lancaster, is the engagement official? Did the separation happen months ago?" Serena's breath caught painfully in her chest as every conversation in the ballroom dissolved into suffocating silence. Damien descended the staircase without looking at her at first, his polished shoes echoing sharply against the marble floor while Claire's manicured hand rested possessively around his arm. Serena felt the ultrasound photo slip slightly between her fingers. No, this had to be a misunderstanding. Damien finally stopped in front of her, close enough for her to catch the familiar scent of cedarwood cologne beneath the cold hotel air. For one impossible second, she searched his face for hesitation, guilt, anything human. Instead, his voice arrived calm and measured like a business contract already signed. "We need to end this tonight, Serena." Around them, crystal glasses froze halfway to lips. Serena blinked slowly, unable to process the words. "Damien," her voice barely survived the silence. "Please tell me this isn't what it looks like." Claire looked away awkwardly, but Damien remained motionless. "The board knows," he said quietly. "The press will know by morning. A clean divorce is the only way to protect the company." "The company?" Serena stared at him as though the man before her had become a stranger wearing her husband's face. For years of marriage reduced to a negotiation beneath chandelier light. Her fingers tightened around the ultrasound photo hidden inside the purse. She wanted to tell him. God, she wanted to tell him so badly. But then Damien said the one sentence that shattered something permanent inside her. "Love doesn't survive in my world, Serena." It never did. The ballroom suddenly felt too bright, too sharp, too cruel. Serena nodded once with devastating calm, the kind that only comes moments before a heart breaks completely. Without another word, she turned and walked toward the exit while whispers followed behind her like ghosts. Outside, rain poured onto Fifth Avenue in silver sheets, soaking her hair and crimson dress within seconds as she finally pulled the ultrasound photograph from her purse beneath the hotel lights. Her hands trembled violently while tears mixed silently with the rainwater on her cheeks. Across the street, enormous digital billboards flashed Damien Lancaster's face beside headlines about power, wealth, and legacy. Serena looked down at the tiny blurry image of the child growing inside her and realized with heartbreaking clarity that the richest man in New York had just walked away from the only real legacy that ever mattered. By sunrise, Damien Lancaster would become even more powerful. And without knowing it, he would also become the loneliest man in America. People said New Orleans could heal almost anything if you stayed long enough. But Serena Vaughn learned that some wounds simply became quieter with time. 3 months after leaving Manhattan, she stood inside a narrow apartment above a jazz cafe on Royal Street, watching rainwater slide down the old window panes while a newborn baby slept against her chest beneath the soft glow of a single lamp. The room smelled faintly of coffee, old wood, and baby powder, nothing like the polished marble and expensive silence of the Lancaster penthouse she once called home. Yet for the first time in months, Serena could breathe without feeling the weight of Damien's world pressing against her ribs. Little Micah stirred softly in her arms, his tiny fingers curling around the fabric of her cream sweater as distant saxophone music floated upward from the street below. Serena lowered her gaze to him, and every shattered piece of her life suddenly felt worth surviving. "You are not abandoned," she whispered against his forehead one cold November evening while city lights flickered through the curtains. "You were chosen by heaven before anyone else walked away." The days became exhausting but beautifully ordinary. Serena taught piano lessons during the afternoons at St. Cecilia Community Arts Center and played quiet jazz standards at the hotel lounge 3 nights a week after putting Micah to sleep beside the upright piano backstage. Money stayed tight for years. Some winters the radiator barely worked, and some months she skipped meals so Micah could have new shoes before school started, but she never allowed bitterness to grow inside their tiny home. Damien Lancaster's name disappeared from newspapers eventually, replaced by younger billionaires and newer scandals. Yet Serena still avoided financial magazines at grocery store checkout lines because one accidental photograph of him could unravel an entire week of hard-earned peace. As Micah grew older, pieces of Damien appeared in him with cruel precision. The same storm gray eyes, the same stillness before speaking, the same habit of straightening his sleeves whenever he felt nervous. By age 12, Micah was already taller than most boys his age, carrying himself with a quiet confidence that made strangers turn twice when he walked into a room. But unlike Damien, there was warmth inside him, a gentleness Serena protected fiercely. On humid Louisiana evenings, Micah would sit beside her at the piano while ceiling fans hummed overhead and ask questions children eventually ask. Did my father leave because of me? Serena's fingers froze above the ivory keys the first time he said it. Outside, thunder rolled softly over the Mississippi River while neon signs flickered through the rain. Serena turned toward her son carefully, studying the pain he tried so hard to hide behind maturity far beyond his years. "No," she answered with absolute certainty. "Your father left because he did not understand what mattered yet." Micah looked down quietly, accepting the answer even though it could not fully heal him. Serena never lied about Damien, but she never poisoned Micah against him either. Some nights after her performances ended, she would return upstairs exhausted and find her son asleep on the couch with textbooks scattered around him and old piano melodies still lingering in the air. In those moments, Serena would stand silently in the dim apartment, watching the boy Damien never knew existed, and wonder if fate understood the irony of creating something so beautiful from the ruins of heartbreak. 18 years passed that way, slowly, quietly, like pages turning beneath candlelight. And somewhere hundreds of miles away, Damien Lancaster continued building an empire large enough to impress the world while remaining completely unaware that every dream he once sacrificed love for had already been living without him all along. By the time Damien Lancaster turned 50, magazines called him untouchable. Financial networks praised his instincts with almost religious admiration, while business schools studied his negotiations like military strategy. His face appeared on giant screens in Times Square beside headlines about billion-dollar mergers and global expansion, and yet every morning he woke alone inside a penthouse large enough to echo with silence. The apartment overlooking Central Park had once been designed for a family. Serena chose the warm lighting in the dining room. Serena placed the black Steinway piano beside the windows because she said music sounded softer when mixed with city rain. Even after 18 years, Damien never moved it. The piano remained untouched beneath layers of quiet dust, like a memory he could not afford to destroy completely. Outside, Manhattan evolved around him with brutal speed, but inside the Lancaster residence, time seemed frozen somewhere between regret and denial. Claire Beaumont lasted less than 3 years after the divorce papers became final. She loved galas, cameras, private islands, and the power attached to Damien's last name, but she never understood the dangerous emptiness living beneath his polished control. One winter evening, she stood near the marble fireplace in a silver gown and finally asked the question no one else dared to say aloud. "Why do you still look at the door like you expect someone else to walk in?" Damien never answered her. 2 months later, she disappeared from his life as quietly as she arrived. After that came a series of elegant women with practiced smiles and expensive perfume, but none of them stayed long because Damien had mastered the art of emotional distance so completely that love could no longer survive near him. His assistants feared him. His competitors respected him. Entire industries moved when he spoke. Yet every night, he poured himself bourbon beside the floor-to-ceiling windows and stared at the reflection of a man who seemed to have won everything except peace. Sometimes during storms, he remembered Serena with painful clarity. The way she used to hum softly while reading near the fireplace. The warmth of her laugh in rooms too cold for comfort. The sound of piano keys drifting through the apartment after midnight, while the city lights blinked below them like distant stars. He told himself those memories no longer mattered, but grief had a way of surviving inside ordinary things. One October evening, Damien attended a charity gala at the Metropolitan Arts Foundation where young musicians performed for wealthy donors beneath crystal chandeliers and candlelight. Halfway through dinner, a teenage pianist walked onto the stage and began playing a melody Damien had not heard in nearly 2 decades. His hand froze around the whiskey glass instantly. Serena's composition, Moonlight Reverie. She wrote it during their 2nd year of marriage on a rainy Sunday in Brooklyn while sitting barefoot beside an open window. Damien had memorized every note without realizing it. The ballroom disappeared around him as the music unfolded gently through the air, elegant and haunting and unbearably familiar. Damien lifted his eyes toward the stage slowly, and his heartbeat stumbled hard against his chest. The young man playing carried himself with impossible calm beneath the spotlight. Tall, broad-shouldered, storm-gray eyes reflecting beneath the piano lights with devastating familiarity. Even the way his fingers moved across the keys mirrored someone Damien recognized instantly. For the first time in 18 years, fear touched him deeper than any business loss ever had. Because across that stage sat a stranger who somehow looked exactly like the ghost of the man Damien used to be before he destroyed the only woman who ever truly loved him. The final piano note lingered through the ballroom like a ghost refusing to disappear, and for several long seconds no one moved. Then applause erupted beneath the chandeliers, elegant and thunderous, but Damien Lancaster barely heard it. His attention remained fixed entirely on the young man standing slowly from the piano bench beneath the warm stage lights. Up close, the resemblance became almost unbearable. The same sharp jawline Damien saw every morning in his bathroom mirror. The same controlled posture that came from years of hiding emotions beneath discipline. But there was something else in the young man that Damien had lost somewhere along the road to power. Warmth. Humanity. A quiet steadiness untouched by arrogance. The announcer stepped toward center stage, smiling brightly at the donors seated beneath the gold-trimmed balconies. "Ladies and gentlemen, please give another round of applause for Micah Vaughn from New Orleans Conservatory of Music." Vaughn. The surname struck Damien with strange force even before logic could explain why. He watched as Micah accepted the applause with calm humility, adjusting the cuff of his black suit jacket in a gesture so painfully familiar that Damien's chest tightened. Serena used to tease him for doing the exact same thing whenever he felt anxious in public. Memories returned with cruel precision after years buried beneath boardrooms and financial reports. Damien suddenly remembered a rainy Sunday in Brooklyn when Serena laughed at him over burned pancakes while composing Moonlight Reverie beside their tiny apartment window. He remembered kissing her forehead while she played unfinished melodies late into the night. He remembered believing happiness could wait until after success arrived. And now success sat around him in crystal glasses and billion-dollar conversations, while happiness stood 20 feet away carrying another man's last name. Micah stepped away from the piano and approached the microphone. "I would like to dedicate tonight's performance to my mother," he said softly, his deep voice carrying through the silent ballroom with effortless confidence. "She taught me that music only matters if it makes people feel less alone." Damien's heartbeat slowed painfully. Serena used to say almost the exact same words before every recital. The young man continued speaking, unaware that one of the most powerful men in America suddenly looked as though the air had been stolen from his lungs. "Everything I am exists because of her. Sacrifices. My mother worked 2 jobs so I could study piano when we could barely afford groceries some months. She never let me feel abandoned, even when life gave her every reason to give up." Abandoned. The word landed inside Damien like shattered glass. Around him, donors nodded emotionally while waiters carried champagne across the polished floor, but Damien remained frozen in absolute silence. 18 years of carefully controlled emotions began unraveling beneath the soft glow of ballroom lights. Micah smiled modestly before stepping away from the microphone, and for the briefest second his gaze drifted across the audience. Their eyes met. Damien felt the impact instantly. Storm gray eyes staring directly into identical storm gray eyes. It lasted only a moment before Micah looked away politely toward another table of guests, but something ancient and undeniable passed between them in that silence. Not recognition exactly. Something deeper. Instinct. Damien rose from his seat too quickly, causing his untouched whiskey glass to tremble against the linen tablecloth. Nearby executives glanced toward him in confusion, unaccustomed to seeing the legendary Damien Lancaster visibly unsettled by anything. But Damien barely noticed them. His entire world had narrowed to one impossible realization blooming slowly beneath the chandeliers, while Serena's melody still echoed through the room. Because for the first time in 18 years, Damien Lancaster was beginning to understand that fate had not brought him to this ballroom by accident. Fate had brought him face to face with the life he never knew existed. That night, Manhattan glittered outside Damien Lancaster's penthouse like a kingdom built for someone else. Rain streaked softly across the enormous windows while the untouched city below moved with restless energy. But inside the apartment, everything felt painfully still. Damien stood near the black Steinway piano long after midnight, one hand resting against the polished surface while Micah Vaughn's performance continued echoing through his memory with unbearable clarity. The resemblance was no longer something he could dismiss as coincidence. It lived in the young man's eyes, his posture, his voice, even the silence between his words. Damien had spent his entire career trusting instinct over emotion, and now instinct whispered something terrifying enough to shake the foundation of the life he had spent decades building. He crossed slowly toward the liquor cabinet, pouring bourbon into a crystal glass with hands that no longer felt entirely steady. On the marble countertop nearby sat old photographs he had not touched in years. Corporate awards, political dinners, magazine covers, success framed in silver and gold. Yet none of them looked remotely meaningful tonight. Damien reached instead for the one picture hidden face down in the back corner beside the piano. Serena. The photograph had been taken during their 2nd anniversary in Brooklyn before the money became enormous and before ambition replaced tenderness inside him. Serena stood laughing in the sunlight with her curls moving gently in the wind while he held her around the waist, younger then, warmer then, still capable of believing love could survive power. Damien lowered himself slowly onto the piano bench, staring at her image while memories returned sharper than they had in years. The crimson dress in the hotel ballroom, the rain outside, the look in Serena's eyes the night he destroyed everything. For the first time, another detail surfaced from that memory with brutal force. Serena had been trying to tell him something that night. He remembered it now with horrifying precision. "Please tell me this is not what it looks like." Then later, quieter. "Damien," the hesitation in her voice. The way her hand rested protectively against her stomach before she walked away. Damien closed his eyes hard. No. God, no. The realization hit him so violently that he set the whiskey glass down before it shattered in his hand. Across the room, thunder rolled faintly over Manhattan while 18 years of emotional distance collapsed piece by piece inside his chest. At 2:15 in the morning, Damien called his private investigator for the first time in nearly a decade. "I need information on someone," he said quietly, his voice rougher than usual. "Micah Vaughn from New Orleans Conservatory, and Serena Vaughn." There was silence on the line before the investigator answered carefully. "Tonight." Damien stared at Serena's photograph beneath the dim apartment lights. "Especially tonight." By sunrise, files began arriving digitally across Damien's secured tablet, while pale morning light spilled across the penthouse floor. Serena Vaughn, piano instructor, founder of St. Cecilia Youth Music Program, New Orleans resident for 18 years. Micah Vaughn, age 18, date of birth, August 17th. Damien's breathing stopped completely. August 17th, exactly 8 months after the divorce. He stared at the screen as the world around him seemed to tilt sideways in absolute silence. Then came the final document. A scanned hospital intake form from New Orleans General dated 18 years earlier. Mother, Serena Vaughn. Emergency contact, none listed. Damien's eyes moved lower slowly until they reached the final line. Father of child, Damien Lancaster. The room went silent except for the faint hum of the city waking outside. Damien lowered the tablet with trembling hands while tears gathered unexpectedly in eyes that had not cried since childhood. All those years. Every birthday missed. Every piano recital. Every moment of fear, sickness, laughter, growth. Serena carried it all alone while he stood on magazine covers calling himself successful. Damien looked toward the untouched piano beside the windows as sunlight crept softly across the keys Serena once played. And for the first time in his entire life, the richest man in the room finally understood what true poverty felt like. New Orleans greeted Damien Lancaster with heavy summer air and the distant sound of trumpet music drifting through narrow streets lined with old brick and hanging lanterns. The city felt nothing like Manhattan. There were no polished skyscrapers reflecting ambition back at him, no marble towers whispering power into every silence. New Orleans breathed differently. Slower, warmer, human. Damien stood beside a black town car outside St. Cecilia Youth Music Program, wearing a tailored charcoal suit that suddenly felt too expensive for the quiet neighborhood around him. Children's laughter floated from inside the renovated building, while sunlight spilled across flower boxes beneath tall windows painted deep blue. On the front entrance, a small bronze plaque read, "Founded by Serena Vaughn." Damien stared at the name longer than necessary, his chest tightening beneath emotions he no longer knew how to control. Through the open windows, he could hear piano music drifting softly into the street. Serena's piano music. The same elegance. The same ache hidden between notes. His hand paused briefly before pushing open the door. Inside, warm sunlight stretched across polished wooden floors where children practiced violins and cellos beneath colorful murals painted by local artists. The air smelled faintly of coffee, sheet music, and old wood polished by years of care. It did not look wealthy, but it looked alive. A young receptionist smiled politely from behind a desk. "Can I help you, sir?" Damien removed his sunglasses slowly. "I am looking for Serena Vaughn." Before the receptionist could answer, the piano music stopped upstairs. Footsteps followed. Calm, unhurried, familiar enough to stop Damien's heartbeat instantly. Serena appeared at the top of the staircase wearing a simple white linen dress that moved softly around her as sunlight framed her silhouette from behind. Time had changed her beautifully. There were faint traces of silver near her curls now, and maturity had softened the sharp edges of old pain into something graceful and untouchable. But her eyes remained exactly the same, warm brown carrying oceans of quiet strength. For several long seconds neither of them spoke. Children continued practicing down the hallway, while ceiling fans hummed gently overhead, but the world between them narrowed into 18 years of unfinished silence. Damien had rehearsed apologies during the entire flight from New York. None of them survived the moment he saw her again. Serena descended the staircase slowly, one hand resting lightly against the wooden railing. She stopped a few feet away from him, calm enough to destroy him completely. No anger, no bitterness. Somehow that hurt more. Damien swallowed hard. "You should have told me." Serena studied him quietly before answering. "Would you have listened?" The question landed with devastating precision because they both already knew the truth. Damien lowered his eyes briefly. 18 years ago, he had chosen reputation over love, without even allowing her to finish speaking. Serena folded her hands softly in front of her, while afternoon light danced across the white fabric of her dress. Micah knows who you are now, she said gently. He figured it out after the gala. Damien's chest tightened painfully. Does he hate me? Serena looked toward the music rooms, where faint piano scales echoed through the building. No, she answered honestly. That is what makes this harder. Silence stretched carefully between them. Outside, church bells rang faintly several blocks away, while summer sunlight warmed the old wooden floors beneath their feet. Damien stared at the woman he once abandoned in the rain and suddenly understood something that power had hidden from him for half a lifetime. Serena Vaughn had not spent 18 years surviving him. She had spent 18 years becoming extraordinary without him. And standing there in the quiet beauty she created from heartbreak, Damien Lancaster realized he had not simply lost a marriage all those years ago. He had lost the only home his soul ever truly recognized. The hardest part about regret is that it arrives long after the damage has already learned how to live without you. Damien Lancaster remained in New Orleans for 3 days before Micah finally agreed to meet him alone. The arrangement came through Serena with careful neutrality, as though she understood both men carried storms they did not yet know how to survive. Late Thursday afternoon, Damien arrived at a small cafe near Jackson Square, where ceiling fans turned lazily above old wooden tables, while jazz musicians played softly somewhere out on the street. The city smelled like summer rain and roasted coffee beans. Damien had negotiated billion-dollar contracts inside rooms filled with world leaders. Yet none of those moments compared to the quiet terror he felt waiting for his son to walk through that cafe door. Son, even. Thinking the word felt fragile and undeserved. Micah arrived exactly on time, wearing a navy button-down shirt with rolled sleeves and dark jeans, carrying himself with the same controlled calm that once made financial magazines call Damien intimidating. But Micah's presence lacked arrogance. There was kindness in him. Serena's kindness. Damien stood instinctively as Micah approached the table. For a second, they simply looked at one another beneath the warm amber cafe lights, while silverware clinked softly around them. Two men connected by blood and separated by 18 years of silence. Thank you for coming, Damien said quietly. Micah nodded once before sitting across from him. My mother asked me to hear you out. The sentence was polite, respectful, but carefully distant. A waitress approached with menus, though neither man looked at them. Damien noticed small details instead. The way Micah adjusted his watch when nervous. The slight crease between his brows while thinking. Every movement felt painfully familiar, like watching echoes of himself raised by someone far better than he had ever been. Finally, Damien spoke the words he had carried like broken glass since discovering the truth. I did not know about you. Micah's expression remained calm, but his eyes lowered briefly toward the coffee cup between his hands. I believe you. Damien blinked, surprised. You do? Micah gave a small nod. My mother would not have hidden me from a good man. Which means you probably were not one back then. The honesty landed cleanly, without cruelty, and somehow that hurt more. Damien looked away toward the rain beginning to mist against the cafe windows. No, he admitted softly. I was not. Silence settled between them while distant trumpet music drifted through the street outside. Micah traced one finger slowly along the rim of his coffee cup before asking the question that mattered most. Why are you here now? Damien stared at his son carefully, because that was what Micah was despite every lost year. His son, flesh of his flesh. Proof that love had existed even when he destroyed it. Damien answered honestly for perhaps the first time in decades. Because I cannot change what I did 18 years ago, but I could not survive another 18 pretending you do not matter. Micah looked at him for a long moment beneath the cafe lights, studying the billionaire whose face matched his own, yet whose life remained completely foreign. Money cannot fix this, he said quietly. I know. Last names cannot fix it either. Damien swallowed hard. I know that too. Another silence followed, softer this time. Then Micah leaned back slowly in his chair and said the sentence Damien would remember for the rest of his life. A father is not the man who shares your eyes. A father is the man who stayed. Damien lowered his gaze instantly because there was no defense against truth spoken that gently. Outside, rain began falling harder across the streets of New Orleans, while while jazz music echoed through the fading daylight. And for the first time in his entire life, Damien Lancaster understood that earning forgiveness would require far more courage than earning power ever did. 3 weeks later, New Orleans gathered beneath golden theater lights for the annual St. Cecilia Foundation concert, an event Serena had spent years building from nothing more than determination, music, and quiet faith. The old Orpheum Theater glowed against the humid evening air while elegant guests filled the restored velvet seats inside, their conversations floating beneath crystal chandeliers and the scent of fresh lilies arranged along the stage. Students from Serena's music program moved nervously backstage in pressed tuxedos and satin dresses, while volunteers adjusted programs near the entrance. At center stage stood a black Steinway piano beneath a single spotlight, waiting silently for the performance everyone in the city had come to see. Serena Vaughn and her son, Micah. Backstage, Serena adjusted the sleeve of her midnight blue gown while studying her reflection in the mirror with calm composure. Age had refined her beauty into something timeless, something no longer searching for approval from anyone. Micah stood nearby, tightening the bow tie around his collar before catching her eyes in the reflection. "You nervous?" he asked softly. Serena smiled faintly. "Always. That means the music still matters." Before Micah could answer, a quiet knock came at the dressing room door. Serena's expression shifted almost invisibly the moment Damien stepped inside. He wore a black tuxedo without his usual air of untouchable control. The billionaire who once commanded rooms effortlessly now looked like a man carrying the full weight of his own mistakes. For several seconds, none of them spoke. Then Damien extended a folded envelope carefully toward Serena. "What is this?" she asked. "The transfer papers for the Manhattan penthouse." Serena frowned slightly. "Damien, I donated it," he interrupted gently. "St. Cecilia will have a permanent scholarship fund now. In your name." Serena stared at him silently, while Micah watched from across the room. Damien lowered his eyes briefly before continuing. "I spent half my life building monuments to myself. I thought maybe it was time to build something that actually helps people." The room fell quiet except for distant orchestra tuning from the stage outside. Serena accepted the envelope slowly but did not open it. Her fingers brushed lightly against the paper while emotion flickered behind her calm expression for the first time in years. A stage manager appeared moments later announcing they were ready. The theater lights dimmed as hundreds of guests settled into silence beneath the chandeliers. Serena walked onto the stage beside Micah while soft applause filled the auditorium. Then she stopped unexpectedly near the piano bench and turned toward the audience microphone. Her eyes found Damien sitting alone in the front row beneath the warm theater lights. "Before tonight's performance," she said softly, "there is something important that deserves honesty." The room quieted completely. Damien's chest tightened instantly. Serena looked toward Micah beside her before continuing with graceful calm. 18 years ago, I believed losing my family would destroy my life. Instead, it gave me the greatest gift I have ever known." Her hand rested gently against Micah's shoulder. "And tonight, after many years apart, Micah's father is finally here." Murmurs swept softly through the theater as every eye turned toward Damien Lancaster in stunned recognition. Damien stood slowly beneath the chandeliers, visibly shaken by the quiet dignity in Serena's voice. No revenge, no humiliation, only truth. Micah looked toward him across the crowded theater for a long moment before giving the smallest nod of acknowledgement. It was not forgiveness. Not yet. But it was no longer rejection either. Damien's eyes filled instantly as Serena sat at the piano and Micah lifted his violin beneath the spotlight. Then together, mother and son began playing Moonlight Reverie while the man who once abandoned them sat in silence, realizing that redemption, unlike power, could never be purchased. It had to be earned note by note, truth by truth, love by love. Autumn arrived quietly in New Orleans 3 months later, wrapping the city in golden light and cool evening breezes that carried the scent of river water and magnolia trees through the old streets. Life did not transform overnight after the concert. There were no dramatic reconciliations or perfect endings waiting neatly beneath chandelier lights. Healing moved slower than that. Real love always did. Damien Lancaster rented a modest historic townhouse only 6 blocks away from St. Cecilia instead of returning permanently to Manhattan. The financial world reacted with shock when he stepped down from daily control of Lancaster Holdings, handing responsibilities to younger executives while tabloids speculated endlessly about a mysterious personal crisis. Damien ignored all of it. For the first time in his adult life, quarterly profits mattered less than ordinary mornings. Some afternoons, he helped repair broken music stands at the school, while children ran laughing through the hallways around him. Other days, he sat quietly in the back of rehearsal rooms, simply listening to Serena teach piano with the same patient warmth that once filled their tiny Brooklyn apartment decades ago. He did not push for forgiveness anymore. He learned instead how to become present, consistent, human. Micah remained careful with him at first, polite, but guarded in ways Damien understood he had earned. Yet slowly, almost invisibly, small moments began stitching something fragile between them. Saturday coffee runs before rehearsals. Conversations about music and business over late dinners at little restaurants near the river. Long walks beneath gas lamps where silence no longer felt hostile. One cool November evening, Damien arrived at Serena's house carrying groceries after a storm knocked out electricity across several blocks. He found Micah sitting cross-legged on the living room floor beside candlelight, while Serena played soft jazz melodies on the old, upright piano near the window. The scene stopped Damien completely because it looked nothing like the glamorous life he once believed he needed. There were no cameras, no billion-dollar negotiations. Just warmth glowing softly against dark wooden walls while rain tapped gently against the glass. Home. Serena glanced toward him from the piano bench as candlelight reflected in her eyes. "You are late," she said calmly, though the faint smile at the corner of her lips softened the words. Damien set the grocery bags down carefully. "Traffic." Micah laughed quietly from the floor. "Dad, this is New Orleans. Nobody says traffic here unless they are from New York." The word hit the room softly. "Dad." Damien froze instantly, while Serena's fingers paused briefly over the piano keys. Micah looked up from the candle he had been lighting, suddenly realizing what slipped out naturally without thought. Silence settled between them, warm and stunned and beautiful. Damien lowered his eyes for a second because emotion rose too quickly in his chest to hide completely. After everything he destroyed, after 18 years of absence and regret and unbearable loneliness, the simplest word in the English language somehow felt more valuable than every empire he had ever built. Serena began playing again, quietly, while rain continued falling outside beneath the streetlights. Damien moved closer toward the piano, standing beside the woman he once lost and the son he never knew existed, understanding at last that redemption was never about returning to the past. It was about finally becoming worthy of the love that remained waiting after the storm. And as music drifted softly through the candlelit room, Damien Lancaster realized the richest moment of his life had nothing to do with money at all.